many things I have questions about. You mentioned paying attention to the new, the very old, or the orphaned. So interesting. And I just thought I'd tell you that when you sit down with a graduate student or a postdoc and they're trying to come up with a project, rarely do you say, like, what do you want to work on? And they fire back like a really interesting question. Sometimes they do, but that's the rare person. More often than not, you'll send them to the literature and they'll come back with like, okay, there's this new technique that we can use to answer a set of questions better than ever before. Or there's a very old theory I want to revisit. Or there's this theory that no one pays attention to. In fact, we had one guest on here, Oded Rashavi, who is studying essentially inheritance of traits, transgenerational inheritance of traits. It's a little bit, although different from Lamarckian evolution, but it's a lot like that in some ways. And, these orphan theories that everyone assumed were wrong and that there is a basis for them. So I think there's real genius in that analysis. It also struck me as you were listing off some of your process circa the writing of the 4-Hour Body, that I and many other people are probably curious about what the operations around all that looked like. So are you, or were you at the time, like waking up in the morning going, okay, I'm going to take a walk and think about the new, the old, and the orphaned, or I'm going to take a walk or sit in a chair and think about like, what are the nerds doing right now? What are rich people doing right now? Or cobbling together awkward solutions. Was that exploration a structured practice for you? Or is this just something that was the consequence of being Tim Ferriss, waking up in the morning and just like leaning into that? Because I've totally experienced both, right? Yeah. But I think a lot of us are curious. I mean, there's a lot of mystique around you.
Whether you like best to dispel it,
whether you like it or not, it's there, and we're not trying to pry, but
pry away.
Is the establishment of structure for you something that's the consequence of structure in the first place? It's like, okay, now it's time to think, or do you just allow things to geyser up to the surface?
I do both, and I would say that in the case of the 4-Hour Body, it's a bit of an anomaly compared to my later books, because I had recorded effectively every workout I had done since age 16 as a competitive athlete. I had a lot of records, and I kept copious notes on supplement use and everything imaginable. So I have what you might call hypergraphia. I just capture almost everything in writing. And that was very useful because at various points in time, let's just say I looked at a photograph of myself from, making this up, but 2004, and I think I would like to look and feel like that again. Okay, let me revisit my workout logs. Let me just replicate the preceding 3 to 6 months of workouts and look at my intake and my diet at the time. And lo and behold, more or less, I could replicate the same type of look and feel and performance. So I had a lot already logged that I thought was worth examining and putting under scrutiny, trying to replicate with other people. I do think replication is really important. And then when it came time to commit to writing the book, I thought about what types of mini books would be of great interest to me personally. And that book, like many of my other books, was written in such a fashion that it could be a choose your own adventure book. It did not need to be read. In fact, in many ways, it shouldn't be read linearly from page 1 to the end. You get to pick and choose which chapters are of interest based on breath hold, vertical jump, endurance, hypertrophy, cold exposure for fat loss, whatever it might be. And then I began talking to people. And at the very outer bounds of self-experimentation, at least in the Bay Area, it's a pretty small community. So you're 1 or 2 lily pads from just about everyone. And it's not accidental that I put myself in that environment in San Francisco specifically, and more generally in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, because there's just a high surface area for luck to stick to, because you have so many serendipitous encounters. You have so many people focusing on different disciplines. That, I think, was the fertilizer and the fertile ground for everything else, was actually the choosing the where of writing, physically being located in San Francisco. And then when I'm structuring things, maybe I'll get into some of the nitty gritty, but I was using at the time, and I still like to use a program called Scrivener, which is actually designed predominantly for screenwriting. It's used for many things now, novels and so on. It's expanded its reach quite a bit, but it allows you to gather research and all of your documents and drafts so that you can move them around in very novel ways so that you can view, say, a split pane of your research and what you're working on simultaneously without having to toggle between a lot of different windows. And I was very promiscuous in my gathering of data. So I would gather from, say, the web using a web clipper from Evernote, which I was involved with as a company, and basically without bias capture as much as possible, put 3 asterisks next to anything that I thought I really might want to revisit after I had read something a second time, which I would always do. Then I could control F to find just 3 asterisks because they don't occur much in normal writing. Just like people, authors, writers will use TK, meaning find such and such a date. Data needs to be inserted later, but I don't want to interrupt the flow of writing. Let me put in TK because it doesn't really appear in natural English much. In terms of structured thinking, the way I approached it was during that period of time in my life, it was interviews, tracking people down, conversations, emails, reading, so ingestion, let's just say, for the workday, then a break for training and actually using myself as the human guinea pig for various things that had surfaced that might be on the docket.
Where were you training at that time? San Francisco is not famous for amazing gyms.
It's not famous for amazing gyms. At the time, I was training mostly at a climbing gym called Mission Cliffs. They didn't have much, but they had barbells.
Yeah, I know that.
And they had kettlebells.
Yeah.
I also had in the walkway leading from the front door of the apartment I was renting, it was more of a house, the front door all the way to the first set of stairs, there were 30 kettlebells of various types. And I was training for certification because I wanted to put myself on some type of deadline with accountability for that type of training to get a better understanding of it. So I trained for a few hours. I also had developed a friendship with Kelly Starrett, so San Francisco CrossFit, who I have tremendous amount of respect for.
Yeah, likewise.
On multiple levels.
He's terrific. And his new book,
Built to Move.
This great book. Mm-hmm. He's so good.
Yeah. He really not only talks the talk, but walks the walk and exemplifies many of the capabilities that he teaches, which I take seriously. I like practitioners, not just the people with pretty theories, although the theories are important. I prefer to see someone who can actually put them into practice. So Kelly served that function, certainly, and we're still very close friends. And then after that, all right, shake off the cobwebs, get the body moving, get the brain moving, also eat, and then I would actually focus on synthesis. So I would write generally from, let's call it 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. through to 4 or 5 a.m. And I would ride the wave if I happened to be in the zone. If I weren't in the zone, I wouldn't force it, and I would try to get more sleep. But I have always performed best with my writing in those witching hours of, let's call it 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. And my experience is that the writers I've interviewed, the writer friends I've become close with, if you look at when they made themselves, not necessarily what they do now, right? But what they did that eventually got them to escape velocity, they're almost always doing most of their writing very late at night or very early in the morning when the rest of the world or their social group is inactive.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I say wow because, of course, all of this was prior to the publication of Matt Walker's seminal book, right? Why We Sleep, which I really see as the book that shifted a lot of people, fortunately, from the I'll sleep when I'm dead mindset to really paying attention to it. And, I don't think Matt gets enough credit. I mean, there's been a revision of a few points within that book, but the majority of it is just spot on and
hyper legitimate.
So good. And yet what you're describing is a schedule that, starting to write at 9 p.m. and finishing up around 4 a.m. But you talked about research earlier that day and training and eating.
Then
so were there naps in there?
I would sleep from, say, 4 to maybe 11 or 12. So I would be getting up later. And I've had conversations with Matt about this. And there are night owls and morning larks. Right? And there are certainly differences in the code, meaning the genetics, but that worked very, very well for me for a very long time. It is, however, a very challenging social schedule. So once you have a significant other, and every girlfriend I've ever had is a morning person, if you want to spend time together, that schedule just does not work. So I made compromises later for the social side of things. But if you put a gun to my head and said, you need to write the best book humanly possible, that is your only priority outside of some exercise and fuel, I would follow the same schedule.
I know several very successful podcasters, Lex Friedman in particular, who I think he's trying to follow a more normal schedule now, but he's pseudo-nocturnal, at least by my read.
Yeah.
And there are a couple other online content creators, Derek from More Plates, More Dates, who's hyper productive in his domain and is mostly nocturnal. Yeah. And then as you're describing your writing routine and your overall routine, I was thinking that, the great skateboarder, everyone knows Tony Hawk, who is obviously a great skateboarder, no doubt about that. But Rodney Mullen, who invented the ollie on street, the kickflip, the ollie, like Rodney is basically nocturnal and has been for a long time, and would skateboard up and down the boardwalk in Santa Monica in the middle of the night because lack of distraction. Yes, it really was. And he's been doing that since his teens. I don't know what he's doing these days, but I think a lot of creators just need space. And I always wonder if that's because when they, at least the ones that are not socially dysfunctional, like yourself, who when they are around people, there's this almost hopefully a desire to interact. So you almost have to remove the stimulus completely.
Yeah, it removes the plausible deniability, which might not be the perfect use of that phrase, but in the sense that it's harder to fool yourself into thinking you're doing something important when you're checking your messages or social media at 2 a.m. Who are we kidding, folks? You should be writing in this case, right? And writers will do anything to avoid writing. I remember Ayn Rand wrote a book about writing, which is actually fantastic. I can't remember the exact title. It might just be On Nonfiction Writing, something like that. And she talked about polishing the sneakers or the shoes before writing. Like, I really just need to do this one thing, which is to just clean up that shoe, because somebody should really clean it up. And at some point I should clean it up. And therefore, why don't I just there's no time like the present. I'll just do that. And it's all to avoid writing, which is the harder thing. And in my conversations with Matt also, I should say that as someone who has self-described as a person who struggles with onset insomnia, Matt made the point, and sometimes we need to relearn things. Maybe you should just go to bed later.
Sure.
And that might address some of this onset insomnia. And I don't know the causes for that, but I do get a second wind very late. Could be related to some cortisol release abnormality or just different scripting in my system. Who knows?
I'd like to take a quick break and acknowledge one of our sponsors, Athletic Greens. Athletic Greens, now called AG1, is a vitamin mineral probiotic drink that covers all of your foundational nutritional needs. I've been taking Athletic Greens since 2012, so I'm delighted that they're sponsoring the podcast. The reason I started taking Athletic Greens and the reason I still take Athletic Greens once or usually twice a day is that it gets me the probiotics that I need for gut health. Our gut is very important. It's populated by gut microbiota that communicate with the brain, the immune system, and basically all the biological systems of our body to strongly impact our immediate and long-term health. And those probiotics in Athletic Greens are optimal and vital for microbiotic health. In addition, Athletic Greens contains a number of adaptogens, vitamins, and minerals that make sure that all of my foundational nutritional needs are met, and it tastes great. If you'd like to try Athletic Greens, you can go to athleticgreens.com/Huberman, and they'll give you 5 free travel packs that make it really easy to mix up Athletic Greens while you're on the road, in the car, on the plane, etc. And they'll give you a year's supply of vitamin D3 K2. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/Huberman to get the 5 free travel packs and the year's supply of vitamin D3 K2.
I'll mention one other maybe heuristic that I use for trying to peek around corners, which is if I find an example of an outlier, trying to find 2 or 3, right? Because 1 is an exception, 2 is interesting, 3 is worth investigating. That's sort of how I think about it. And I recognize the plural of anecdote does not equal data. However, a lot of interesting discoveries begin as case studies or case histories. And So there are some things we could talk about that I've paid attention to over the last few years that are not in the 4-Hour Body that I think are quite interesting and raise very, very exciting questions. But
I'd love to hear about those.
Yeah.
And along the lines of what I call anecdata, I mean, most of what we know about human memory stems from one patient, HM, who had his hippocampi removed for epilepsy. And of course, there have been millions, probably close to millions of studies in animals and humans focusing on the hippocampi, but most of what we know about human memory is from one guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So there's a lot to be examined. Not all of it will get funding for RCTs. Let's be realistic. This is especially true if you're hoping for any type of directive data. Notice I'm not saying conclusive, but if you are a human who's going to be making decisions about diet, health, exercise, if you want any consensus, you're doomed. You're not going to get any answers before you die.
Can you say that twice so that the internet can hear it extra loud and clear? For those of you that are arguing about nutrition on Twitter, like it might actually be life wasted.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not being judgmental. I mean, I think that there's validity in lots of those pockets. There's stuff that's wrong in lots of those pockets.
Yeah.
There are diets that work extremely well, like, 4-hour diet or slow carb. I always call it the 4-hour diet, but the slow carb diet, it works extremely well. Anytime I followed it, I get much leaner and stronger and all that stuff that it's purported to do. It works. But yeah, maybe you could just explain what you mean by that, because I think there are some argument/friction spaces that are truly an energy sink.
Yeah. I would just say focus on what works for you and your family or your team. And if you're arguing on the internet, recognize that you're just doing it because you like arguing on the internet. You're not going to convince anyone of anything. And you're just going to make yourself more frustrated if you plan on changing any opinions. So for me, it's live and let live. And the more people who engage in that type of behavior, the more competitive advantage do you have if you don't. So for me, I'm like, okay, if you want to spend this vital, non-renewable resource of yours called time on that, if I ever compete against you, I'm going to win. So great. I'll just, I'll also not even try to convince you to stop doing that unless you see the logic in it, which I have, which is why I also don't have, at least for 2 years, have mostly had no social apps installed on my phone. And we could talk about that, because I think recognizing that these things have been engineered to overcome any type of self-discipline with billions of dollars at stake should lead you to believe that you're bringing a knife to a gunfight. So I just don't have the apps on my phone to begin with. And I find it much more gratifying to see disproportionate change from small inputs. So that's what I'm looking for. And I'm also looking for changes that are easy to make, that can have high adherence, that have very limited downside, which is very different from proving something. For instance, in the 4-Hour Body, took a look at the potential effect of cell phones, or the proximity of cell phones to, say, gonadal function and reproductive health. And the literature that was available at the time was very limited, had some animal studies, mice, rats, et cetera. I recognize humans are not just large mice, so they don't always translate. But I looked at it and I said, okay, looking at this simplistically, is it plausible that there could be similar effects on humans? Seems to be the case, also based on conversations with people who are specialists but would never go on record. Therefore, if your phone is in your pocket, just have it on airplane mode. I mean, it does not have a high cost. And then, pending any revision, we can see, but while the jury's still out, I'm going to risk mitigate by taking this step.
Yeah. Well, and I just want to say thank you there too. I read that recommendation. I followed the recommendation of not keeping the phone on in my front pocket or back pocket. And that's anecdata. Yep. My sperm analysis isn't relevant to this conversation, but worked out. But you could say, well, that's not necessarily because you had the phone off, but I did a very long, detailed episode on male and female fertility. Mm-hmm. There is now what I view as a really quality meta-analysis. And it's pretty clear that there are effects of the smartphone on proximity of the smartphone when it's turned on that are not good for sperm. Isn't necessarily going to render somebody sterile, but on sperm that can be separated out from the heat effects. Mm-hmm. And so essentially this is another instance in which you were right. And I think more data will come out. And am I a EMF conspiracy theorist? No. Do I wear tinfoil underwear? No. But I think it's interesting. I think it's important. And thanks to you, cued my attention to it. In fact, I teach about that in a course on neural circuits and biology and health and disease.
Amazing. Yeah. And I don't expect to get